views and opinions expressed in this program are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect the views of BronxNet or the program underwriters.
Hi there, welcome to the Bronx Buzz. This is BronxNet's program where we talk to reporters and writers and editors and journalists and videographers and filmmakers, anybody who's putting something out in the borough of the Bronx, to give you a little insight as to what they're thinking when they put it out. In our second segment, we're going to do something unbelievable. We have a group of Bronx people and Bronx actors who have put together, hold your breath, the Honey Zoomers. We'll find out what that means. You know what it's a takeoff on. Anyway, but to start, we're going to get very serious with our good friend, Zack Williams from City and State New York, who is, and you can see it, it's not a virtual background. He's at the state capitol in Albany. Nice to have you with us, Zack.
Thanks so much for having me. It's always a pleasure.
It's always great to have you. Now, let's go right to the top. Calls have come in to say that Governor Cuomo should resign. You did a story that said a majority of likely voters say he should resign. Our friend, the governor, is tough as nails and believes what he believes, and he certainly has said he won't. We're recording this on Monday. I heard that somebody else was going to come forward and allege that he acted inappropriately. There you go, Zack. What do you think? Where are we going with this? What's going to happen with Governor Andrew Cuomo?
Well, there's a couple different investigations going on. One conducted by Attorney General Letitia James into alleged sexual misconduct, a reported cover-up of COVID-19 deaths among nursing home residents, and other issues. There's also a impeachment probe going on by the Assembly. I think the bottom line is it'll be months before we get any clarity about the governor's political future. You know, he has said he will not resign, even though just about every elected Democrat in the state, and most Republicans for that matter, have already called for him to resign or be impeached and removed from office.
He has, as you just acknowledged, stayed strong. Do you have the sense, and you hang around there in Albany probably more than you should, do you think he's performing as he would otherwise? In other words, do you think it's affected his performance other than, yes, there's something else he's thinking about? But, he's been rolling out. I think today they announced that they're going to drop the age for vaccination eligibility. What do you think? Are we getting the same governor, even though he's somewhat distracted?
Well, I think one thing you got to keep in mind in terms of assessing the governor's political position is that public opinion only matters so far when he's halfway through his third term in office. He wouldn't even run for re-election until next year. So he's got time to see where things land. Right now, that's something that's so essential for him is maintaining his political support in the business community, among organized labor, and the Black community in particular has been the bedrock for his political support thus far. And polls have shown that even though roughly about half of people say he should resign, half of people say he shouldn't resign, he's staying now, and he's going through the budget negotiations right now. And my sources say that by and large, his people are acting the same way as they would in any other year. But I think it's very fair to assume that the governor is nowhere near as vocal about his budget priorities this year as he would in a normal year where he wasn't facing multiple scandals across the board.
I don't want to say, especially about Andrew Cuomo, that all of a sudden it makes him a softie, but maybe it makes it easier. And of course, with the Democratic majority in both houses of the state legislature, it would seem if you're a state legislator who wants something, for example, like legalizing marijuana, that you want to get through, this could be a time to do that with a weakened governor. And then we can go to the next step and say even, taxing the rich, which Governor Cuomo has basically been, the stalwart that's stopped that over the last couple of times.
Gary, it sounds like you should run for the legislature because you got good instincts. We've already seen the legislature pass these long-awaited new limits in solitary confinement, the so-called HALT bill, which passed earlier in the month. They're just finalizing a deal on recreational marijuana that's much more favorable to what legislators wanted versus the governor. And as we speak, I got a story that's getting ready to head to press about how they're really looking to steamroll the governor on education funding. So, a lot of lawmakers are kind of seeing, some opportunities in the political game, which is the budget process. And while a lot of them want to push him out of office, they're not willing to overlook some other opportunities to deliver for their constituents in the budget due April 1st.
And of course, that opportunity is there. It's almost like, why waste it when we control both houses, which is something that hadn't happened for a while. And of course, with the supermajority in the Senate, even greater leverage over issues. So let's talk about the budget. My sense from just a couple of conversations with Bronx legislators is that it's going well, and the deep past when we did not get a budget by April 1st is not going to happen this time, and we are going to have a budget by April 1st. Your thoughts?
Well, the governor has always prided himself on maintaining the functionality of state government ever since he was first elected in 2011. Making the budgets pass more or less on time by that April 1st deadline has been very important to his political brand. I think that might be used against him this year. State lawmakers obviously got a lot of budgetary priorities, and they can kind of hold that against the governor that, if this thing goes late, if they do not pass a budget by April 1st, he might be the one that looks like he's not in control of the situation, even though they got these legislative supermajorities that could get a budget done really as soon as they're willing to put it on the floor and vote on it.
And he, the last thing he needs now is to look like he's the problem in this state, because he's got, of course, other issues.
Doesn't help.
There was something that flew by. I don't believe I read it in City and State. I read it somewhere else, that all of a sudden the governor's office announced that they found $6 billion somewhere. And I thought that was just, I don't know if you're familiar with it. Maybe I saw it in the Times.
Money's been all over the place, Gary.
Sorry, well, you're up there, I'm down here.
Yeah. Billions of dollars flowing to, there's been so much money moving around with all these federal aid packages, and also unexpectedly high tax revenues in recent months. So, the economy has really not been as bad due to COVID-19 as originally projected last spring. And that includes billions of dollars in state revenues that weren't expected, but are now flowing in. So while the governor has talked about a $12-15 billion deficit for this upcoming fiscal year, the real situation has not been nearly as bad. Maybe there's a couple billion that they still got to make up. But by and large, this $5 billion that they discovered is just tax revenues that ended up exceeding projections.
Yeah, I'm going to be talking to my accountant later, and I'm going to tell him, I just happened to find $5 billion. It's just going to work out for us. But so does that mean, the whole notion of public school funding, you mentioned it earlier as a sticking point in the past. Does that mean that maybe the governor's, not going to be able to say, hey, we don't have the money for this, we don't have the money for that, but we have money for that?
Well, the history of school funding with the governor and legislators is very controversial and too long to explain here. But the bottom line is legislators say that public school districts are owed about $4 billion in outstanding funding. That's $4 billion. They are really hoping, given the governor's political troubles, given this influx of federal aid, and given their own legislative supermajorities, that this is the year they make a down payment on that $4 billion, starting with $1.4 billion in the upcoming fiscal year that would go to nearly 700 school districts across the state.
The ongoing lawsuits and fight over the campaign for fiscal equity. I mean, this has been going on. I've been doing this here at BronxNet for 26 years. Well, that has been going on.
That's about how long it's gone on.
During the majority of it, and the calls still come out. Hey, when are we going to get our fair share funding for education? Just going back to the question of taxing the rich, does that mean that the governor then has a little more leverage to say, maybe we don't have to do that this time, even though there is certainly a large grassroots call to finally say, let's get this done, even all the way up to Washington?
It could be interesting how that plays out on an issue like online sports gambling, which is currently illegal, but they're hoping to legalize it in this budget. One of the reasons why they want to get done this year was because of this purported budget deficit, and hopefully they could raise a couple $100 million every year by allowing New Yorkers to wage sports bets online. They're still hoping to crack a deal, but there is some differences between what the Senate wants and what the Assembly wants on expanding gambling. And, given that they already got billions of new federal aid coming in, revenues are exceeding projections, it's an issue like that might not seem as urgent now to get done by April 1st as it might have a couple weeks ago.
That's actually a fascinating.
Same could be said of taxes too.
Yeah, it's a fascinating answer. And I guess I want to add into that, and then just we got about a minute before we go, is the idea of COVID relief. The stimulus bill coming out of Washington is going to be significant, obviously, or is already significant. Does that mean that the state, as far as funding the small business development and all the other things that people have wanted in the local areas, that all of a sudden the state doesn't have to kick in because the federal government is taking care of that?
You got to remember, Gary, this is a state run by Democrats.
Oh,
you
yeah.
know, so it's a matter of, are they going to approve a lot of money or not quite as much money? Don't get the governor wrong. He wants to increase education spending, although he does want to replace a lot of it with federal funds, not state funds. But, there's a lot packed into this budget, much too much to discuss here. Yes, the Democratic lawmakers want to establish like an excluded workers fund, $3.5 billion to help undocumented people and others who didn't qualify for stimulus checks, unemployment, other COVID relief. But there's going to be a lot of spending in this bill, no matter who gets their way, Governor Cuomo or the lawmakers, although the latter, obviously, per the golden rule of legislators that you always probably spend more if you got enough to spend. They want to spend a couple billion more on this budget than the governor probably will be willing to expect. But at this point, they got the upper hand for sure.
Well, we established that at the beginning of this conversation. And, on one hand, I'm sympathetic to that because every district has needs right now. And every legislator says, you know what, we got to get, because I'm hearing it from everybody, not for profits. I mean, we did a show on mental health on Bronx Talk this week. And, even those providers are suffering during a time when, especially in schools, they need it. Anyway, listen, Zack Williams and his colleagues at City and State New York, I don't know what we did before City and State was doing its thing, but now that you're here, we're much better informed. And we always appreciate you taking the time from your work, which you clearly are doing, to join us here on the Bronx Buzz.
Anytime for the Bronx, Gary.
There you go. All right. Thank you so much. That is Zack Williams from City and State New York. We'll be right back. We're going to take a break, and then you'll see what I mean. It's the Honey Zoomers. Don't go away.